Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by Old School Lane, producing various content from blogs, videos, and podcasts discussing about movies, TV shows, video games, and everything else in between since 2011. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, Overcast, Breaker, Pocket Cast, and YouTube. We're associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Casual Chats. I'm Patricia, and I'm here with Arun Mehta from the Arun Mehta Show.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
All right, well, today we're going to be discussing about NES and SNES memories. Now, this is something that Arun and I have done in previous episodes of Casual Chats, where we look back on memories of consoles. We did the Game Boy Memories podcast, and we did the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive podcast.
Well, I thought we'd do something different this time around because I've actually got the physical boxes actually here. So we're not doing this online, we're actually doing this here in the studio here in Manchester. And so I thought I'll get out the boxes of all the NES and SNES. It's not everything, but it's basically going to be enough for us to talk about certain things. So how about we open the... Basically, these are boxes full of NES and SNES games, controllers, other things like that. I thought maybe we could dive into these boxes and maybe we can have some conversations about what's in them.
Oh yeah, for sure. So right before we get into that, what was your earliest memory of the NES and the SNES?
My earliest memory of the SNES is actually my first ever video game console. It was bought by me, actually it was bought by my dad in 1993. We went to Toys R Us in order to get it. We got both a Super Mario All-Stars and Super Mario World, so those games were the big games pretty much at the time, and I absolutely adored them. So hopefully we'll find them in the box and we'll be able to reminisce about them.
Yeah, and as for me, the NES, I remember it was like back around the early 90s when my teacher actually had it on her classroom. So on Fridays, whenever that we finished off with our school assignments and whenever that we had all of our work caught up, we would have something called free time, in which like every 30 minutes you can be able to go off and do something. You could draw, you can read, or you could watch a movie or like one of those 30-minute school specials, or you can play with her NES. And I remember she had things like Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3, and she had Yoshi and Double Dragon and various other games. And as for the SNES, my cousin owned an SNES, and whenever that I would go home after school, then he would come over and he would bring his SNES, or I would go to his house after school and we would play with his SNES. And he had things like Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Mortal Kombat 2, and various other games. So yeah, let's open up this box of goodies, shall we?
So shall we start with the NES, shall we?
Let's do the NES first.
First of all, regards to the NES, my first memory of the NES was buying it pre-owned from GameStation when GameStation was a thing at the time. And so I bought this, I think it was around about £12 or something like that. Like It was very, very cheap at the time. But also on top of that, it came with like a number of games. Now, I've had to bag these up because these games are very fragile. So I don't really I try my best to I keep them clean as much as I can. But I think the first thing we should probably talk about in regards to the NES is probably the classic NES controller itself.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I have the controller in my hand, and yeah, looking back on how controller are, they are today, it's very rectangular. So I would take it like for today's standards, it would be kind of like a little uncomfortable with your hands because you have like the you have like controllers that basically like shape around your hands nowadays, and
Yeah, apparently we've somehow evolved into like our hands not being able to hold rectangles for whatever reason.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah,
And
I can fit my hand around this and press the buttons and everything like that. I don't know why anyone else would have a struggle to do this. To be quite honest with you.
yeah, I guess so. I mean, I take it that maybe with like younger gamers that are not accustomed to like holding rectangles, that maybe they'll be thinking that it's a little bit uncomfortable, and also
We're coddling today's youth, quite frankly. Like just I think these have more more awkward controllers, if you ask me.
right, and you have
drill this out of them.
Yeah, you have the D-pad, which is basically a Nintendo copyright exclusive, where it's basically the directional button. You have up, down, left, and right. There's no analog stick in this one. You have start and select, and you have the B button and the A button. And there's no L and R controllers or anything like that. So this was pretty much it.
Yeah, but actually, this actually wasn't just it, because if anyone remembers the Angry Video Game episode of like the NES accessories, there were various other ways that you could play your NES. So there was obviously the NES Max and the NES Advantage, and then also there was the Power Pad as well, and also there was the various other ways. I mean, some of them were like were failed experiments. Admittedly, like the Rolling Rocker, for example.
Oh yeah, the
like,
Rolling Rocker. Yeah. You had
you were holding the controller anyway, so you might as well just push the buttons. Like,
exactly.
It makes no
You might
sense.
as well just push the buttons. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, there were some other ones too. Like, do you remember the NES top loader?
Yeah, I remember the top loading one as well. And also there was, I think, a third generation as well. I think Super Nintendo. Sorry, not Super Nintendo. A Nintendo Entertainment System as well, which I think was very rare. And I think also, if you remember, the Japanese version was also not known as the NES. It was known as the Famicom
right.
at the time. And also, the Famicom came with a disc system as well.
Yes,
a disc system that was never released in the United States or released in Europe.
Yeah, and also another thing that we never got from Japan was also the NES. I mean the Famicom. Keyboard. We never got that either, where you can be able to just like log on and basically just fiddle around with like various other things. Like you can be able to enter in some certain codes, so you can be able to like access certain games and stuff like that.
Yeah, there was a nice little nifty trick that you could do if you bought Famicom games. The Famicom games actually do work in the NES, and let me explain why. Because if you bought a particular, I don't know, there are some particular games that they basically cut corners when they were making them. So instead, what they did was they made NES cartridges that basically were more like expansion packs. Basically,
yes,
they had like the expansion cards in them. So basically, what they did was they plugged the Famicom circuit board into basically this adapter that was inside the NES cartridge, and basically that's how they made them so they could play on American consoles. So if you wanted to, if you had any games that basically had these adapters in them, you could pull those out. You could take apart the Famicom cartridge, put that in the NES adapter, put that in there, and then you could play Japanese games on an American console if you wanted to.
Yeah, and there were several games that we never got in America or in Europe that was exclusive in Japan. And I'm sure that you've probably seen like various episodes of AVGN where he talked about like every time that a Japanese game was exclusive over there, it was either the only good one or the worst of them all.
Yeah. So anyway, this is about our memories.
Yes, exactly. So, this is our memories.
So let's start off with the classic Tetris.
Yes. So Tetris. I mean, what's more to say about Tetris? I mean, you have the classic puzzle game involving with like 7 blocks.
I love that on the front. It says "From Russia with fun."
Oh.
Yeah, grief. So the one thing I would say about, I mean, we could sort of talk about like whilst we're talking about Tetris, we could talk about the cartridge itself, and so they all had these different types of warnings on them. So like caution: do not store in extreme temperatures, do not immerse in water, do not clean with benzene, thinner, alcohol, or such solvents. So like they really did tell you to look after these things effectively, and these like you think that these things also the fact that they are so fragile now, that I have to keep them like away from like air and things like that, like that's how much of a paranoid I am about breaking these things.
Yeah,
basically.
and you remember when we were kids about that the way to clean an NES cartridge was to blow on it?
Yeah, well, in actual fact, you're just blowing more bacteria in it and causing even more of a mess.
And also, not to mention that you're causing more erosion because you're adding moisture into it. The real thing of how you can clean up a NES cartridge is if you get a toothpick, a little tiny bit of cleaning solution, and you should be able to remove all the dust from it.
I believe like glass cleaning solution, I think is probably like the beneficial one.
Yes, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, we are talking about Tetris, actually. So, Tetris, I think I've spoken about Tetris, multiple times, like on Arun and Patricia, and like on various casual chats as well. This is the game I really, really love to play, and so you can play like, I think you can play multiplayer as on Tetris, and there's actually this is a subject of a docudrama as well. On Apple TV.
There was an Apple TV movie where you get to see the actual makings of Tetris and how Steve Rogers was able to go all the way to Russia to convince the government to release Tetris in America and various other countries because they were just so tightly knit over there.
Yeah, and I think this is like one of the most fun. For those of you, I mean, if you've not played Tetris, then you need to go stop listening to this podcast and go play Tetris. Seriously, it's everywhere. There's even apps you can download on the Apple Store for for Tetris as well. So like it's not just on the NES, but Tetris is like it's just about a bunch of blocks. The blocks come down and they go faster every time as the game goes on, and you have to really it really does test your senses and really tests your strategy of how you put these blocks down together. When you get a complete line, that line disappears and then the whole structure falls down, and then you get more blocks, and that's basically a bit of a rough description of Tetris.
Yeah, pretty much. Now it's actually funny because I think we briefly mentioned about Tetris in the Game Boy podcast, and we also talked about how Tetris, depending on which version you had, they had different music.
Well, if you remember, I spoke about Unreal Tournament a number of times, and one of my favorite things I used to do while waiting for multiplayer games on Unreal Tournament to start was actually I downloaded a mod which actually gives you like a little Tetris game to actually play while you're waiting for the game to start, and that's what I used to do. I used to before I started slicing people up with the Ripper on Unreal Tournament. I used to just go playing Tetris, and that's how versatile Tetris was, and I'm pretty sure I've said that previously. But,
you probably have, yeah.
Yeah, I just think that's this is a great game and a really a great classic for the NES.
Yeah, and I know that also for a lot of people who probably were introduced to Tetris in other ways. They were either introduced to it through the SNES with Tetris and Dr. Mario. There was Tetris 64. There was Tetris DS, where it actually featured various Nintendo levels, and then just recently Tetris 99, where you get to play this huge battle royale where you play off against 99 players on Tetris, and the one who's standing is the winner.
Okay, so next one in this is Mario Brothers Duck Hunt, that's classic cartridge. So for those of you who aren't aware, you could actually get what we would call the gun for the NES, and it's actually known as the light gun, or
the NES Zapper.
Yeah, NES Zapper. Recently there was a hilarious story about a guy who painted a NES Zapper and tried to rob a store with it. So
we talked about that in Arun and Patricia a few weeks ago.
Yes, we did. Yeah. So let's start off with Mario Brothers. I mean, first of all, Mario Brothers is exactly what it says on the tin. It's Mario Brothers. It's 8 levels. Or going through a fantasy world, trying to rescue a princess, only to be told every time you go through a level that sorry, the princess is in another castle and you have to go to the next one.
Yeah, I mean, all the staples of classic platforming is right here. You have the side scrolling, you have the power ups, you have the levels, you have bad guys that you get to be able to fight off against, and it basically set the standard of platforming games to come. And also, it wasn't exactly the first of the Mario series. I mean, we had the Mario Brothers arcade game in 1983, and he did show up in Donkey Kong in 1981, but this was the game that a lot of people got introduced to with Mario, and even still to this day, Mario is still a icon in video games. We still have a lot of games to this day, and they're even making more games of it on the Switch, and of course, there's the unprecedented Super Mario Brothers movie.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so yeah,
but also there's Duck Hunt as well, and Duck Hunt basically utilizes the light gun, so you get various things that you can do. So you can either do the clay pigeon shoot, which you basically launches like two discs into the air, and you basically shoot the both of them, and that just keeps going and going and going. Or you can play the main game, which is where you actually go on the duck hunt. So what happens is a duck comes into the air, you shoot it with the light gun. How the light gun works is it works a lot like a barcode reader. So what it does is it determines where the white block is on the screen. You'll notice it'll flash just briefly, and what will happen is the light gun will then read the screen and find out where the white block is. Now, if it finds the white block, it will hit the duck will die, and therefore the dog will then lift it up and smile at you. And but however, if you can't read the white block, what it will do is the duck will fly away, and then the dog will basically just laugh at you.
Yeah, and there were so many memes of people hating the dog. There used to be like various games, even on Newgrounds, where you get to actually shoot the dog dead.
Shoot the dog.
Shoot the dog. Yeah,
George Michael.
Yeah, but even still to this day, Duck Hunt has become an iconic series of games that you get to play with the light gun, and you even have the option of even playing as the Duck Hunt dog in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate.
Okay, next memory. So, this actually is a collection cartridge. It is actually called Donkey Kong Classic. So, what this is this is the original Donkey Kong and also Donkey Kong Jr. combined. It's all in the same cartridge. So, it's funny because I never really played the original Donkey Kong when I was a kid. I was actually introduced to Donkey Kong Country first, and then I learned about the original arcade game. And when I did see it, it's like, wow, Mario's the bad guy, and he basically like kidnapped Pauline. This is for Donkey Kong Jr., by the way. And then for the original Donkey Kong, you have where Donkey Kong kidnaps Mario's girlfriend Pauline. Yeah, not Princess Peach, not Princess Daisy, Pauline. And basically he goes off and he goes through various levels, jumping on barrels and avoiding oil drums and various things to rescue Pauline. And it's actually funny because they reference this in Super Mario Brothers Odyssey, in which you have like the Donkey Kong City that you get to visit around. And there's also the fact that with Mario, you get to actually play as him with the hammer, which is a power-up that you would see a lot in like recent RPGs, but no, this is actually the power-up that Mario used. And also not to mention that Donkey Kong Jr. was a character that it's kind of difficult to say, because I think that they sort of kind I don't know, for Rare just kind of like did a continuity error thing with having Donkey Kong, the original Donkey Kong, be essentially Cranky Kong, and then Donkey Kong Jr. was either one of two things. He was either the current Donkey Kong grown up, or they were originally going to have Donkey Kong Jr., but then they decided to scrap it in favor of Diddy Kong. And yeah, I think that the continuity is a little bit mixed. To be honest with you, I don't really care about that, to be quite honest. I know it sounds really strange, but like a Cranky Kong, I just say, well, okay, he was the original Donkey Kong and this is the current Donkey Kong. I just accept that.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, it's a classic arcade game, and originally this was supposed to be a Popeye game, if you can believe it.
Yeah, I remember this is funny, a lot of games that have come through Nintendo's thing, either different. Keep in mind, obviously switching gears a little bit, but you remember Dinosaur Planet for Nintendo 64, that originally was supposed to be its own thing from Rare, but then Shigeru Miyamoto suggested that they make it a Star Fox game, and therefore Star Fox Adventures then came out on the GameCube and was Rare's last ever game for Nintendo.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so overall, classic arcade game. There's also a Game Boy version, which is also really good, and they even had recent versions on GBA and DS. So classic arcade game still holds strong.
Okay. The next one in my list is Super Mario Brothers 2.
AKA Doki Doki Panic.
Yeah, exactly. So, this was a departure, I think, from Mario Brothers, because obviously you got more characters to play with. So not only do you play with Mario, you got to play with Mario, Luigi, either Toad, or you got to play with Princess Toadstool, as she was known as at the time. So, the idea is that they get dropped into this world, and you end up not really bouncing on enemies, if you will. You end up picking them up and throwing them at people.
Yes.
Pretty much, and this game is radically different from the Mario Brothers that we actually know from the original NES.
Yeah, the biggest misconception at the time was that it's not a real Mario game. It's essentially Doki Doki Panic, but they swapped off with the Mario characters. Well, here's the thing, and I'm sure that you probably know this if you've seen digital gaming videos from 10 years ago, where originally they wanted to do a side-scrolling Mario game that you could be able to go up as opposed to just scrolling side to side. And then there was the whole deal with the Doki Doki Panic with Tokyo TV, and then with Mario mixed into it for the Americans, because we didn't know any of the characters from Doki Doki Panic. I think it was based off of a TV show or something like that, or maybe they were the mascots of the TV company. I'm not sure, but the point is that technically this was supposed to be a Mario game all along with the mechanics, but the characters, on the other hand, was a little bit different. I know it's a bit iffy, but I know some people, they've dismissed this altogether, saying it's not a true Mario game, but I actually like this. In fact, I prefer this over the Japanese Super Mario Brothers 2, where it's essentially the first Super Mario Brothers game, but it's really, really hard. But yeah.
And if you remember, Super Mario Brothers All-Stars, they actually renamed it to Super Mario The Lost Levels.
That's right. Yes, they did. So yeah, I really enjoyed this game. I love the way that you can be able to play as the different characters. Mario's the neutral one. Luigi has the double jump. Toad can run really, really fast. And Peach, even though she's the slowest, she has a really, really extensive jump. And you have different, bad guys that you had in the first game. Birdo was introduced here. Shy Guys, Bombs, you had, Ostros, the introduction of Mouser and Wart were in here as well. So yeah, a lot of essential bad guys that we would know from classic Mario was introduced here in Super Mario Brothers 2.
The only complaint I would say I have about this game is the ending. So basically,
yes.
The ending, you find out after you beat the final boss that actually this whole thing was just a dream that Mario was having.
Yes, but they basically go all Saint Elsewhere, in which the whole hospital drama was nothing more than just the imagination of a kid looking through a snow globe. So yeah, the whole thing was a dream, which is a major cop-out, yes. But
what was the one when the soap opera where they killed off a character, and then after that they had the woman wake up and they found him in the shower?
Oh, that's Dallas.
Yeah.
Who shot JR? Well, it turns out that JR was in the shower this whole time, and the 2 or 3 seasons that she thought that he was dead was nothing but a dream.
Yeah, okay. And the final one in my collection that I have a very small NES collection, admittedly, is Super Mario Brothers 3. And this is the game that was first introduced in the movie The
Wizard, yes.
California.
California. I love the Power Glove. It's so bad. Yes,
Oh my God.
I've done an entire podcast on The Wizard with my friend Chris, aka Rowdy C from TV Trash. And I have to say that as somebody who saw it back in 2007, back when I was in my video game tournament / anime phase in college, if seeing it from that perspective, it's it kind of took me back into that time period where people were just so mystified with video games. And yeah, it's a bit stupid at points, but I kind of see it as a really fascinating time capsule into 1980s pop culture. And Super Mario Brothers was probably one of the major highlights that people still remember to this day, where here's the thing, the game came out in 1988 in Japan, but because they didn't have enough chips to distribute it everywhere else, they had to wait another 18 months for people to get it. And so they made this huge deal out of Super Mario Brothers 3 because nobody had ever heard of it outside of Japan. And so you have many things that made, I would say conceptually, is the best Mario game on the NES. You have the multiple levels, you have the power-ups, you have Bowser and the Koopalings. You have like all the various levels, and also you have such amazing music, and it just turned out that the whole thing was nothing more than a stage play. So yeah, it's fantastic, even still to this day, that people consider it to be the best Mario game.
Yeah, I think it's a really great Mario game, and also it was pretty much the first inception that would then go on to be Super Mario World, effectively, because then they would use like the map system, and also they would use some of the power ups. Well, they use like variations of the power ups that came out in Super Mario Brothers 3. So but Mario 3 ended up kind of like being the first kind of blueprint to like how you would do a Mario game effectively, and they still somewhat use this kind of system even to this day, and we're going to be getting it soon with Super Mario Brothers Wonder.
That's
later.
right. Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah, and another thing that I want to mention about Super Mario Bros. 3 was the GBA version of it, where they actually had like multiple levels that you can be able to unlock using the e-reader card, but only a few of it was released in America. You got none of it in Europe, and it was all in Japan. And because the e-reader didn't work out very well in the US, we only got like maybe 8 levels, while they got like over 50. And so the only way that we Americans can be able to play like over those like over 30, 40, 50 levels was when it was released on the Wii U Virtual Console, and just recently it's released on the Switch Virtual Console. So yeah, Super Mario Bros. 3 is such a fantastic game. Go check it out. Either version is fine. But yeah, right before we go over to the SNES stuff, what are their favorite NES games that you have that is not in your collection?
That's a really great question. I mean, I got to be honest with you. Like my memories. I mean, tell you what, probably I can tell you what the worst game I ever played on.
Sure.
NES game. It was the Terminator games. The Terminator games are terrible.
No.
Yeah, they're awful. I played them, and yeah, they are really really awful to play. And so I play LG. In regards to LJN games on the NES, I totally agree with Angry Video Game Nerd. They really are the worst. In the collection if you ever have them. And but to be honest with you, like most of my memories are basically in my collection. All the Mario games I played, Tetris, and those were my NES memories. I gotta be honest with you, I think when we move on to Super Nintendo, I think these are more of my fond memories.
Okay,
I gotta be honest with you.
Yeah, so I guess we'll go over to that in just a moment, but I just want to run off some of my favorite NES games. So Castlevania 1 and 3 are some of my favorites. I remember like playing them when I was a kid, and I was really happy when there were more availability of it, because I just recently got the Castlevania collection on the Steam on Steam. And then there was also Mega Man. Like, I love Mega Man. I did an entire podcast of Mega Man with Ash Paulson from Game Explain, and we talked about like the classic games and the Mega Man X games, which we'll get to in a moment. But yeah, I would say that out of the games on Mega Man, the classic series, you had 1 through 6. My favorites are definitely, I mean, I do like 2, but it can get a little glitchy at times. 3, I also did enjoy like the first half, didn't really care about the second half very much. 4, I thought it was very balanced. And 5 and 6, I didn't really like 5. 6 I thought was really underrated, and the first game is a little bit rough around the edges.
Cool.
And then there's also Metroid. I also really love Metroid, the original, but I would prefer to play the GBA remake, which is Metroid Zero Mission. And let's see what else there was. Double Dragon. Like I said, I really love Double Dragon as well. I also really like Battletoads. And there's plenty. Oh, Punch Out. I'm really good with the NES Punch Out as well. So those are some of my favorite games that I played on the NES when I was a kid. All right, so let's go over to the SNES.
Yeah, so I got the box open already. I'm really keen to actually talk about this. So, when the Super Nintendo came out, I mean, it kind of annoyed a lot of parents. You remember, like, there was the news reports saying that, oh yeah, the Super Nintendo is here, but unfortunately, it can't play the old Nintendo cartridges, which apparently got a lot of people annoyed. So, but thankfully, I didn't have that problem, because at the time, I didn't have an NES. My first ever console, I am happy to say, was the Super Nintendo, and I loved the Super Nintendo.
I love it too.
I think it's one of the most fantastic pieces of gaming history, I think, that we have. Now, I'm sure there's going to be people out there saying, like, it was a Sega Mega Drive that won the console war, whatever, because, Sonic got an attitude, and, obviously, Michael Jackson was there, obviously, when he wasn't controversial. But, I still believe that, hands down, I think, down to the games, down to the hardware, down to the accessories, I believe the Super Nintendo actually was the game console that defined the 90s, in my opinion.
Yeah, like we said in the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive podcast that we did with my good friend Tom, that it's a bit of a debate on which console was the best because they each had their strengths and weaknesses. I mean, obviously, with the whole blast processing of the Mega Drive, it technically was faster, but it was weak in everything else. Processing power and
but
colors.
here's the thing, like the CPU in the Mega Drive, I think was, I do agree, was superior in every way to the Super Nintendo. However, the problem that they had is that they decided to make a really powerful processor in the Mega Drive, but they basically decided to cheap out on every other important aspect, whether it was the RAM, whether it was the sound card in the device, whether it was the even the graphics chip as well. Like, if you really think about it, they really decided to say, okay, we're gonna punch all our power into into the processor, but not really thinking about giving it any, like, it's kind of like giving it like a really intelligent brain, but not giving it any muscle. Effectively, to kind of like, be able to flex. Whereas the Super Nintendo, okay, it's not the most, process friendly game console, but you really, when you look at it, you don't really need that. Like, we're going to go through some of these games, and I guarantee you, like, a lot of these here are going to be like, well, why would you need blast processing with these games? These games are fun on their own.
Exactly, yeah. And it's funny enough that Nintendo was originally not going to do a follow-up to the NES at all until they saw, Sega releasing the Mega Drive and then all of the games that came out of it, Alex Kidd, and especially Sonic the Hedgehog, where they were like, oh, wow, now we really have a competition going on. We need to be able to release a follow-up to the NES. And yes, I know that there were some complaints that it wasn't backwards compatible, which, unfortunately, is still a problem to this day. I don't understand why a lot of these companies have to, like, basically say, okay, we have these consoles, it's going to be around for a few years, and then you have to, spend hundreds of dollars on your next console, and you have to have a slew of games with it. I mean, the only issue that I would personally have on that is that, you have to, like, go bang for your buck on this. It's like, yeah, there's going to be some people out there who are going to be, like, playing the next console, and then you have the leftover stuff, but, sometimes there's a case in which, like, maybe it's good for you to wait, because, usually when it comes to, like, recent reveals on consoles and what the games are, it's always nice for you to see if that is going to be the thing for you. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a 3DO or a a Philips CDI situation. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely. So, shall we go through some of the accessories first? Maybe?
Yeah, let's go through the accessories.
Right, so obviously you get the standard Super Nintendo controller, and so this, as you can probably imagine, here's the thing about this though, because this, as you can probably imagine, is very radically different from the Super Nintendo that you're different. So do you want to tell everybody how different the Super Nintendo is compared to the Super Nintendo in Europe and the Famicom?
Absolutely. Like, first of all, I'm looking at this right now, and I'm looking through the buttons, and they're colored. And I can understand where the color comes from, because if you look at the original Super Famicom logo, it has these colors right here, while we have, unfortunately, purple buttons in the main controller. So we talked about that, how in the NES, where you had two buttons, A and B. Well, this one, you have four buttons. You have A, B, Y, and X. And then you have two back buttons right over here. You have the L button and you have the R button. So that was used for many things, whether you were like using it so you can be able to push off, fighting moves for Street Fighter so you can have your moves stronger, or you can be able to use this button so you can be able to aim, like in Super Metroid, so you can have the L button to aim, and then you can have like the R button to shoot, or you can be able to customize the controls however you wanted to. But yeah, other than that, I would say that it's more or less the same, with the exception of that you have the Super Nintendo, which it has the Famicom logo right in the front, and then of course you have the multicolored buttons, which our colors were just purple, and that was pretty much it.
There was also, but by the way, that wasn't the only control that you could actually get. You could get something like this, which is so bizarre when
I
you
have
look at
seen
it.
something like this. So I am holding in my hand the super famous card, which is basically that you can be able to play around with the speed of the of whatever button that you're pushing. So if you just push off like some knobs right over here, depending on which button that you are going to be pressing, you can be able to press a button really, really fast. That way you don't have to worry about like jamming your thumb through the button so that you can be able to like do something. So yeah, that way your thumbs don't wear off and it doesn't become tired.
Like, for future game consoles would become intelligent to that. If you remember Metal Gear Solid, you can't use like auto fire, controllers because it would automatically find out where it was.
Yeah.
So they did finally find ways to lock all that out. However, some of the third party controllers actually were pretty useful at the time because here's the Competition Pro and look at the D-pad.
Yes.
you usually only have like 4 directions to kind of go in. This one has 8.
Yes, it does. And it does have the option of being able to smoothly, at least at the time, move your fingers through any direction that you want on the D-pad so that you can be able to have much more of an easier way to pull off moves. This would be really great for fighting games. So
it helped me get through Star Fox without a controller.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, for something like a fighting game like Street Fighter where if you're going to do a Hadouken, for example, you would do like the classic, quarter circle and punch or kick or something like that. And it'll be a lot easier for you to maneuver. And that's something that the Sega Genesis, like the basic controller didn't have. It didn't have the L and R buttons, and it only had 3 buttons where you can be able to have much more of a variety with other buttons on the Super Nintendo or the Super Famicom, whichever version that you have. So, yeah, let's take a look at another accessory that you have.
Okay, then. So, what would you believe? We have a mouse here.
Yes, that's right. This right here is the SNES mouse, and you could use it to play Mario Paint. So, yeah, I remember that I had... Oh, and you actually have Mario Paint.
Yeah, I do have Mario Paint. Oh, yeah, well, the story goes that I actually asked my dad if I could actually have Mario Paint, but my dad said at the time, well, you have a computer that already does, all this stuff anyway, so he couldn't justify doing it. And so, so eventually, future down the line, I actually did buy Mario Paint, and I actually did have a lot of fun with it when I first started playing it. And so basically how it works is that you need to not plug in the controller, you need to plug in the mouse. And I'll tell you what, though, this is one of the ball mouse. Now, before, modern mice now today either use like infrared or use like light, technology. So but I gotta be honest with you, this is a ball mouse. This has like a ball inside of it, and I have to say it is one of the most impressive mice that I have ever used because we've always had. There usually used to be times when mice would break down either because the mechanic is in it, you just can't turn the ball anymore, or you had to put talcum powder on it, something like that, in order to keep the ball moving. You just wouldn't be able to move on its own. But there's hats off to Nintendo. They actually came up with a really good solution for a mouse thing. I really kind of wish they kind of built more of these mice, to be quite honest with you. But here we are.
Yeah.
So.
And as for Mario Paint, I didn't really use a lot of the painting at the time. I was mostly there for the mini games and for the music. I really enjoyed futzing around with whatever music that I can be able to come up with, even though that I didn't do a really good job of it. But there was also the mini game where you get to swat a bunch of flies, which I thought was
the fly swatting game.
Yeah, the fly swatting game, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, I also really like the fact that you can be able to have all of these pre-made drawings, so you can be able to color it, and they also have animation, so you can be able to customize it, and you also had a free-for-all, so you can be able to color and draw whatever you wanted. I mean, if you are a pro, you can be able to do some great stuff with it.
Yeah, there is another, but unfortunately, the actual big, massive bazooka that you used to be able to get with the the Super Nintendo, it's still back in storage somewhere. But I have managed to keep hold of
that's the sensor for the Super Nintendo scope.
Yeah. So how the Nintendo scope works is that it looked at the dots on your CRT television, and it would look off the red dot, and basically that would describe help how it would aim. However, it wasn't very good, because if you had a flat TV, it would not really aim all that well, and it also depended on the size of the TV as well. So it was sort of a downgrade really from the light gun, where all it needed to do was read a white square, and then after that it would decide whether you hit the target or not. This made it far more difficult, and so I actually do have the SNES scope game in here. It's a red and black thing, and so if you saw how awful the Virtual Boy was, in red and black, I think you always see this is where we're having red and black on Nintendo things. Should basically be here it is. So that is the Nintendo Scope 6.
Yeah, I remember this one.
These are the 6 games that you get for the Nintendo Scope.
Yeah, I remember that my cousin actually owned one of these, and he had the CRT TV. It wasn't he didn't have a flat screen, at least not at the time, and so he was able to shoot around it, and it was able to do it just fine. The problem was that compared to the NES Zapper, is that you needed to plug in AA batteries to the scope, as opposed to
And by the way, if you don't take them out quick enough, it drains them in a couple of hours.
It does. I remember that we had to get a ton of batteries for this, and here's the thing: I owned I wouldn't own a Game Boy until a little bit later on, but I remember I used batteries because I actually did have 1 or 2 Tiger handhelds. So I think that having to save batteries for this stuff was just ridiculous, especially since traditionally with these things you would use maybe 2 or 4. No, you had to use 6 for this, and sometimes the game didn't work because maybe the aim wasn't correct. But yeah, it's just crazy to think that the only way you're going to be able to make something like this work is if you have a CRT TV, which it's kind of hard to find anymore.
Yeah. The next, probably, I don't know if this is going to be the last accessory we'll look at, but these were the tribal taps. And what do you think this did?
Oh, yeah, you can be able to plug in at least multiple controllers for multiplayer.
Exactly. So, yeah, because at the time, the Super Nintendo only had 2 ports where you could, plug in, controller ports. However, there were games that did utilize it. By the way, we'll go through the games later on. I'll tell you which ones utilize the multi-tap. However, if you wanted to play, you could play 6 players on this, and there are. And I was going to say, where are you going to find 6-player games? Well, Micro Machines did it, and also there's another game in that collection which we'll talk about in depth, which you could do it as well. But yeah, I have to say, I use the multi-tap a lot of time with all my friends, and I tell you what, it's a lot of fun. It is really good.
Yeah, the only time I wish I had something like this accessory was for my PlayStation 2, where when I plugged it in, I can play up to what was it, 6 players or something like that, because you plugged it into the second port, and you can be able to have more ports so that you can be able to plug it in. And I use it for things like the multiplayer for Ratchet and Clank, or you get to play up to 4 players for various sports games. But yeah, I mean, I could see this being really big for a lot of multiplayer games for the SNES.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we've delayed further enough. I think we should probably get right into the games, if you ask me. And I really want to start with this one, if I may. Super Mario World.
Yeah, let's go for it.
This is a great Mario game. I love this game so much.
I do too. In fact, I may have called this my favorite Mario game of all time, but then games like Super Mario Galaxy and Odyssey came into the light. But I remember I played this a lot. I've beaten this game at least 2 or 3 times in my life.
I've beaten it probably more than 10 times. I love this game so much.
I love it too. I love the fact that it expands the world. Even though that you get less power-ups, but I personally feel like things such as the leaf is able to make up for it. And also you get Yoshi into the mix, and Yoshi's a great addition. And you also go back to the basics of the side-scrolling, as opposed to going all the way up like you would with Super Mario Brothers 2. Although you do a little bit of that in Super Mario World. And you have the Koopalings back, and you're also able to have different worlds even after you completed the game. And that's one of the things that I love about it. It has great music and the secrets that you're able to discover. It's such a great game.
Yeah, and it's just the fact that you have so many different worlds that levels you can go to as well. Like underwater worlds, you got
the forest
worlds, you got the ghost houses as well. You got the castles themselves, and also you got the underground levels. So the underground levels are pretty cool.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, and also you guys get to enter into the Star World as well. well, which if you got like certain secret like keys and put them into locks, you could basically unlock the star portals, or like unlock secret passages. You can go into like different places. So like it wasn't linear anyway. You can actually go into the secret bits, and you got to go to the Star World. And if you completed all the Star World bits, it takes you into the secret levels, and then you can get some specials from there.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that the star levels were basically like named after like 90s pop lingo, like tubular and awesome and radical and stuff like that. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So, again, like Super Mario World, I love this game. It's not just the fact that it's just part of my nostalgia. I guarantee you, this is one of the best Mario games. If you've not played Super Mario World yet, I seriously suggest you go play it.
Yeah, there's many ways that you can play it. A virtual console. It's on the GBA. It's probably out on Switch Online. It's like one of the it's on the SNES Classic. It's one of the de facto games that you need to play.
Okay then. So maybe we should probably get to some of the side games out of the way maybe first. So I'm going to pull out Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing.
I have not played this game at all.
So Nigel Mansell was a very famous Formula One driver. He won very many championships, and this was his game. And it's pretty common. At that time, you had Madden, and you had various other people like games. They had Michael Owen's World Cup Soccer, things like that. This was pretty common for place for the things like this to happen. So Nigel Mansell's World Championship Racing. Basically what you do do Formula One racing. So you have to race a Formula One car around a track, and you have to stop for pit stops and things like that. You have to also pick what types of tires you're gonna have, customize your. This game was actually very involved. You had to customize your racer as well whilst you're doing that. So but mind you, it was Formula One racing, so you are going around laps, multiple laps, time and time again. Now I could probably get third in Nigel Mansell's World Championship. I've never won a race though. This game is so hard.
Man.
Yeah, it really is. So that's Nigel Mansell's World Championship really for you, and the music's actually really good in it as well. Actually, so I do agree on that. So just to get that one out of the way, the next game I really do want to highlight is the next game that I actually played, which is somewhere in my... Here it is. So this is the second game that I actually played after playing Super Mario World, and that's Super Mario All-Stars.
Yes.
Now, this came with my Super Nintendo at the time, so that's the reason why I got Super Mario World and got this at the same time. It was a really cool deal that Toys R Us was doing at the time, and so we ended up getting both, so I think that was really cool.
Yeah.
So Super Mario All-Stars, it's basically what it is it's remakes of the original Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario 2, Super Mario 3, and also it includes what is Super Mario Brothers 2, which in actual fact is, so is it Mario Brothers 2 Lost Levels, which in actual fact is just Mario Brothers 2.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe this is how I first got introduced to Mario, at least in terms of when, I played through the other games. Now, I did mention that I did learn about, the NES games from my teacher, but I also, got more into Mario because of the All-Stars pack. And at the time, with the Super Mario World graphics inside of these games, I thought that they were brand new. I didn't know that they came out years before. I mean, literally, the original Super Mario Brothers came out 1 year before I was even born. And so I thought that these were new games, and I was playing a lot of Super Mario World at the time. And so I was thinking wow, there's even more Mario games for me to play with. And this is this is probably my favorite way of playing the classic Super Mario Brothers games. I'm sure the NES versions are great, but I actually like the SNES versions a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay, so the next game I would like to pull out of the collection is... Oh, here we go. This is FIFA International Soccer. So when I was a little boy, I went to a guy who dressed up as Santa Claus, and I asked him for this game, and I got it. So therefore, if you see a guy who's dressed as Santa Claus and you want a football game, go ask Santa Claus right now. He'll give it to you. But so I'm serious. So the reason I pick up this game is because before you were talking about the multi-tap, which is the device that gives you the opportunity to put in more than two controllers in it. You can put in 6. Now this game you can play with 5 people.
Wow.
So this game is pretty awesome. So you can have 5 people, running around a football pitch, we're trying to score a goal. So basically, it's a soccer game. So the one thing I will say about FIFA International Soccer is that they were allowed to license the the countries, but they weren't allowed to license the players. So you'll notice that in this game that there are no like real named players in this game, and it's a shame really, because I think this is probably one of the best football games on the Super Nintendo, in my opinion. And so I've won the World Cup multiple times on this, because of course you do. But the problem is that I always play as the Brazil, and but the problem is that it's easy to win with Brazil, but when you try and win with any of the other teams, it is really difficult, especially when you get it seems like Morocco and Saudi Arabia like that, because what it is when you win the cup, you then get access to cheat codes that come with that. And but to be honest with you, after I found all the cheat codes on GameFAQs.com, there was no real reason to kind of keep playing the World Cup anymore, so I kind of just kind of gave up on it after that. But
that story about using the countries but not using the players, it kind of reminds me of Ken Griffey Jr.'s baseball, in which they were able to license him, but they were not able to license all the other baseball players, so they had these weird made up names to add into the lineup. I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. The next game in my collection is Mortal Kombat 2, and this is actually one of the first really violent games that I played on the Super Nintendo. It was kind of funny because we bought it, and my dad didn't realize that this game was actually for 17 and over at the time. This was before we had the rating system actually on games. Before, it used to be advisory. So if you wanted to play a really violent game like Duke Nukem 3D or something like that, you could do. There was no rating system on there at the time that was legally, so people were, basically allowed to play these games if they wanted to. So, Mortal Kombat 2, we used to joke about the fact that when I used to punch people and there were all sorts of blood would come out, it's just it's tomato ketchup. And that was the joke that me and my siblings used to use when playing Mortal Kombat 2. Took me a good long while to actually beat this game and actually beat Shao Kahn. Good grief. I was stuck on Kitano for ever. I must have not been able to get past him for probably a year and a half when I first owned this game, and I pretty much gave up at one point. And then I looked up some walkthroughs about how to actually beat the game, and then it was oh yeah, okay, and then I did it. So Mortal Kombat 2, it's not as good as the arcade version by any stretch of the imagination, but at least it's a passable port, I would say. In my opinion.
Yeah, I actually did play a lot of this as well because my cousin owned Mortal Kombat 2. And I remember just the amount of blood and violence and all of the fatalities. And then there was also friendships. The stages even can kill you. So I remember that just being so abrupt with this game.
Isn't it fun when you knock people into the acid or knock them into the floor, stuff like that?
Or you get to punch a person and then they just fall all the way to the ground and then they just cut up with spikes, and you just get to see the blood pouring down.
We had a fun childhood, didn't we?
Yeah, it's a fun childhood with blood, but
fatality.
Yeah, just it was really, really great, and it was on par with Street Fighter 2 as one of the best fighting games that you can play on the arcades. But yeah, I really did enjoy this game. I also became a follower of Mortal Kombat for several years. I kind of gave up after it went over to 3D because it didn't look that appealing to me. And then I found out about Shaolin Monks when my cousin played it, and I was really invested in the storyline with Liu Kang and basically just going over different levels and having a beat 'em up style, which is actually pretty interesting. And then when Mortal Kombat 9 came along and rebooted the entire series, that was okay, now I'm following this again. And now Mortal Kombat 1, which is basically a refresh in the alternative universe that happened in Mortal Kombat 12. So yeah, that's an interesting story. But yeah, just looking back on where the series came from, and the movie and the Mortal Kombat theme song.
Well, the less we speak about the movies, the better.
Yeah, that's true. All right then.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm about to pick out a game that you love so much.
Yes, Super Metroid. Yeah. So I've already talked so many times about my history with this game, but for those who don't, I already talked about my time playing the original Metroid when I was about 7 years old, and then my cousin got a copy of Super Metroid because it was one of his dad's favorite games, and so I was able to play the heck out of it. I got lost so many times, but at the same time, I was just really infatuated with its atmosphere and its music, and the fact that you were able to like defeat all these bad guys. You have to find the power-ups, you had to find the weapons, and you had to like go through many obstacles so that you can be able to reach the end of the level. And I say this to this day that it's still probably my favorite video game of all time. Metroid Dread was really, really close to doing it, but Super Metroid is the one that still holds a special place in my heart.
Do you know what's special about this cartridge?
What's that?
This is the big box cartridge.
Oh, really?
This had the strategy guide in it and everything like that. And, I'm really kicking myself because, back in the day, like, we just saw, like, these as just, boxes just as packaging. So you just throw them away.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And, like, I feel like now that I see how valuable they are, like, some of them might go for, like, $250 now or something like that. Like, if I felt like if I kept it, like, that would have been a really valuable collector's item now. But now it's just a standard cartridge. So,
right.
like, I feel really bad about throwing it away now. But,
I mean, what we didn't know that at the time. We just thought.
We didn't.
We had like small rooms to begin with, and we needed to like store this stuff in an easier way, and so we just threw the box away because it just took up space.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyway, that was Super Metroid, and the next game I really want to talk about next is definitely Super Mario Kart. This was basically just to fill up the Super Nintendo library. Like, there was no real thought that actually went into this, and in fact, it wasn't even going to be a game full of Mario characters. If anything, it was going to be just a generic racer, but then, obviously, Mario characters were brought into it, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
It is the first, edition of Mario Kart. It's, I have to say, it's a lot different from where we are now with like Mario Kart 8 and like all the various other Mario Kart games that we've got.
Yeah, it had a very small roster. You had Mario, you had Luigi, Princess Toadstool, Toad, Bowser, you had Yoshi, and you had Donkey Kong, and that was pretty much it. You only had a small roster of characters, and you also
keep in mind, like the Super Nintendo, the cartridge it also could only take a certain amount of the time. Now, if it probably had the Super FX chip, when they developed that, where maybe we probably could have had more characters, maybe we had more possibilities. But keep this in mind, like the Super Nintendo and the existing hardware that they had at the time couldn't do the things that like have an expanded roster or anything like that, or like even then, if you go into, there's a YouTube video about how difficult the development of Mario Kart was. Now there's another game that we're going to talk about later on, which had like a basic like understanding of like how these 3D kind of races work, but they have to go really in depth with the technology in order to pull this off.
Yeah, and so you have a lot of the levels that would become the standard of a lot of Mario Kart games. You have like the regular tracks with dirt and with water. You had Bowser's levels. You had Rainbow Road. You had the Ghost section. So yeah, a lot of the stuff that we take for granted in modern Mario Kart games started here. Not only that, but we also had the battle games where you got all the balloons. You get to pop them. It's all started off right here. Now, we recently, what was it, like in the last year or so, we actually played through all of the Mario Kart games because you had this Mario Kart 64, Double Dash, and then Mario Kart 8, and we were like looking at it, like, wow, the controls have vastly changed and improved since.
Enough, like I have Mario Kart Wii, and I also have like Mario Kart I have Mario Kart DS as well. The only Mario Kart game that I don't have is either like the arcade version and Super Circuit. Those are the only two that I don't have.
Okay then, yeah. So I remember playing through the original Mario Kart last year when I was in England with you, and yeah, I would say that it's a little bit rough around the edges. It definitely has that classic case of first game syndrome where the sequels were able to improve in every single aspect of it. Although I don't like Mario Kart 64 very much, I find the controls to be a little bit rough, and I felt that Double Dash was the one that really just played so smoothly for me. That and Mario Kart 8 were the ones that were my favorites. But I cannot deny of what an impact that Super Mario Kart was able to leave in the gaming, circuit.
Okay, the next game I really want to talk about is Micro Machines. That's actually an Ocean game. So, Micro Machines, they had like various versions of this game, but the versions that I had was Micro Machines 2 Tournament, and also I had Micro Machines also on the SNES as well. So, I liked Micro Machines because it was basically a basic racing game, and so you had to like race to the end of the screen, and then obviously you would win. Obviously the different rounds that you play with like multiple multiple players. And also, like, you could do like the arcade racing as well, where you have to basically defeat every single racer and basically collect all the micro machines, from all the races and everything like that. So, like, Micro Machines was a really fun game in that time.
Okay, yeah. I've never played Micro Machines. All I know about it is like the little tiny cars and the Micro
I would
Machines
definitely
guy.
say though, like, as much as I do like Micro Machines on SNES, I do prefer the PC version.
Okay, then. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought that the one cool thing about Micro Machines when you showed it to me was that because they're really tiny cars, the entire racetracks are basically like regular things, just gigantified, and I just thought that was actually really cool.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about F-Zero.
Oh, yes, F-Zero.
F-Zero, I thought I bought this, a lot later on in life, and because I kind of, I played F-Zero GX, and I was just a bit curious because I did see F-Zero online, and I bought it, and just to give it a bit of a once-over, and, it is, even though it only has, a couple of ships that you can play with and everything like that, just racing through, like 1,000 miles an hour, things like that, that was pretty fun, and, it was not that, it doesn't do anything it isn't overexerts itself. It is actually a very basic racer. If anything, it kind of puts the Mega Drive to shame when you really think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when I first saw the commercial for F-Zero, and it was basically just simulating about how fast the game was, and to the point in which the guy who's playing the game is all the way back in his seat, and his face is just overstretched because of just how fast it was going. And yeah, I mean, it introduced us Captain Falcon and various other characters that we would know from the F-Zero series, and unfortunately we haven't had an F-Zero game in a very long time, not since the GameCube.
There was a guy who basically spent thousands of dollars on shares to basically get into a shareholder meeting to actually ask why is F-Zero in all of this. That's how badly some people actually want an F-Zero game now,
yeah,
in
exactly.
2023.
Absolutely. So, yeah, there's a reason why, because F-Zero, even though that it's a basic game, it's still a lot of fun, and people wanted Nintendo. Come on, get it together.
Come on, get it together. So, anyway, I'm saving the best till last, so I'm going to go through some of these other games. Oh my goodness, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island.
Yes.
This got a lot of fans really happy, they really do like this game. So, so basically what it is it tells it's actually a prequel.
It is.
Actually, it is. So it's kind of like if it's, it's not actually right to call it Super Mario World 2. If anything, it's like Super Mario World, Zero, if anything.
I mean, to be fair, we had The Godfather Part 2, and that was a prequel.
Yeah. So, so the idea is that Mario and Luigi are babies, and the Maggie Koopa snatches I can't remember the name of the game. Kamek snatches Luigi, and Mario falls to the ground and is rescued by Yoshi's, and it's up to Yoshi's to help Mario basically go up to find Kamek and to be able to rescue his brother. So I really love this. This game is so colorful. It's I love the animation on it. Also, the 3D animation on the island is also pretty cool too when you first start up the game. And just also all the villains, all the bosses are also really fun to play against as well. So I didn't manage to play Yoshi's Island until a lot later on, until right after, because back when the Nintendo 64 launched, all the, as you can probably imagine, all the Super Nintendo games then got cheap, and then obviously then you could buy them and everything like that. So that's kind of what I did. I waited until Nintendo games started getting cheaper, on the previous, and then started kind of buying them in bulk.
Well,
really,
yeah, that's great hindsight considering of how expensive they are nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. So, also, have you noticed that there's a problem with the actual Super Nintendo cartridges themselves? Imagine having them in the way that I've had them to do. I've had to memorize basically where every game is in my box. So some people who on these pre-owned games have had to go to as far as to actually write what the game actually is on the top of the cartridge.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this right now, and the PAL versions of your cartridges have no end labels.
No, they don't.
Yeah,
and the Famicom versions didn't have those end labels either.
That's really interesting, because usually whenever I remember looking at the cartridges of, Super Nintendo or NES, they had the end labels right on the side so you know what game you're looking at.
You can now buy end labels, just because people have had foresight, so they say, oh yeah, maybe we should have end labels. So you can get them, now, but back in the day, you had to basically just kind of pull the game out and that's the going, okay, this is Yoshi's Island. Keep in mind, we didn't have the boxes because we threw the boxes away. So basically you had to rely on what cartridge you had at that time.
Yeah,
So,
the only
yeah.
time in which I've seen an issue with that was like with the Nintendo 64, where they didn't have end labels, and then afterwards, going on from GameCube onwards, you had the CDs.
Well, I mean, yeah, GameCube didn't really have they had like the CD boxes, so you can see what was
Exactly,
in there. Yeah,
right.
but they didn't really count as end labels, really.
Yeah, but
They
I
weren't
want to
even
talk.
cartridges.
Yeah, but I want to talk about Yoshi's Island. I remember when this game came out, and it was all about Yoshi, and I just thought to myself, that's a really interesting idea because I really liked playing Yoshi in Super Mario World, and being able to have like this baby Mario that you had to protect. I mean, yeah, he got a little bit annoying with the crying at times, but I mean, that's not. Yeah, exactly. So I didn't really have too much of an issue because I was able to avoid it as much as I could. But yeah, the levels are really creative. I really love the music in this, and the graphics are really, really nice and colorful. I remember a Digidome Gaming video where they were talking about that Nintendo wanted Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island to have 3D graphics akin to like Donkey Kong Country, but Miyamoto was like, no, I want to have simple crayon drawings because it would fit the aesthetic of Yoshi, and it works. It looks really great. And I also love the final battle with Baby Bowser, where he's just like this Godzilla-sized monster because Kamek was able to throw his magic at him, and he had to like fight him from afar, and that was like really, really cool.
Okay, so the next game that I've got is Kirby's Dream Course.
Okay, so essentially
this essentially is golf.
Yeah, this is essentially golf. So yeah, you have Kirby and you have various other colors of Kirby, and you just go through all of the different levels and just whacking Kirby around like a ball. And if you're able to get power-ups, you can be able to fight off against various enemies. And yeah, the whole point of the game is just to get in the hole as with least hits as you can, and then just win the game. And I've never been good with golf. I mean, Aaron can tell you that I suck at golf.
Well, you're very good at putting. I'll never say that. So, and also, you thrashed me at mini golf at one point as well.
Oh, that one time.
That one time, and then ever since then, I've been getting you back. But yeah, so I mean, the reason I ended up picking, I didn't originally own Kirby's Dream Course. The only reason I ended up picking this up because I saw it was Aaron and Dan from Game Grumps playing it, and it was just so hilarious watching them play it. So I thought, you know what, I'll pick it up for myself.
Okay.
And also, Tom also owns, my friend Tom, shout out to him by the way, he owns an SNES Classic, and he has Kirby's Dream Course on there, and also you have an SNES Classic, and you have Kirby's Dream Course on there.
I do.
So I need to practice on my Kirby's Dream Course, so I know when I'm up for a fight. So even though he has to win a game on Kirby's Dream Course, by the way, but it was my
I know, I do.
Oh, by the way, I do say that send the best till last, and these are my favorite trilogy of games. I'm sure there's another trilogy of games that I really love, but this is the Donkey Kong collection. Minus Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Wii, but I digress. These are the Super Nintendo games for Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy Kong's Quest, and Donkey Kong Country 3. Yeah,
I really love these games so much, even though that they were a little bit difficult at times, and especially if you're trying to get 100% or 101% or 102% or 103%. But these games are amazing. The fact that they were able to bring back Donkey Kong in a new light, because I mean the last time that we saw him was back in the 80s with like the Donkey Kong Juniors and all that kind of stuff, the arcade games like we talked about before. But they were able to bring back Donkey Kong in a fresh new light, and they were able to have great platforming on par with Super Mario World. And you had the amazing music done by David Wise, and Rare was able to knock it out of the park with their 3D graphics, which at the time was revolutionary. Like there was no other video games like this at the time. And also you have all of the amazing animal companions, and you also have King K. Rool as the baddie and all the Kremlings, and then of course you have Donkey Kong Country 2, where you get to play as Diddy and Dixie, where you're trying to save Donkey Kong, and then Donkey Kong Country 3, where you're trying to save Donkey and Diddy Kong, and you get to play as Dixie Kong and Kitty Kong. And so yeah, all three of these games are fantastic in their own unique way. and it's kind of hard to say like which one is the best because they each have their massive strengths.
I like Donkey Kong Country 2. I think Donkey Kong Country 2 out of the three, I think Donkey Kong Country 2 I think is probably my favorite.
I would probably say the same thing as well. It was definitely the game that I felt was very balanced with all of the levels. I really liked the speed of both Diddy and Dixie, and also the music I feel was definitely on par with the first one, that David Wise was able to have complete control over it and he just knocked it out of the park. And you also have like Sticker Brush Symphony and all these other fantastic games. I mean, you also have to give credit to the way that they were able to have King K. Rool's final battle, which was also really great. So yeah, I really love the Donkey Kong Country games, and the less we say about the animated series, the better.
Yeah. So, I mind you, in absolute Nintendo Direct fashion, I actually do have another surprise.
Oh,
and that
really?
Is that, now, I don't have it with me, but I keep it in a box because it's in its original box with its original manual and its original wrapping as well. I have got Star Fox.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and actually, here in the UK, we call it Star Wing because Star Fox was a trademark company. I think it was a vacuum cleaner or something like that. So you couldn't use the word Star Fox, but we do have Star Wing. And
okay.
So Star Wing, as we know it back at the time, was I loved that game so much. Like the idea that it uses the Super Effects to make the Super Nintendo do 3D aspect. This was like a whole new way of doing gaming at the time, and the fact that Star Fox was able to pull that off using only just some more additional chips in the cartridge and not actually touch the original hardware of the Super Nintendo, I thought that was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That. And I like the idea of if you got Fox McCloud, Peppy Hare, Slippy Toad, and Falco Lombardi. These are a bunch of rebels who are going through to Corneria and going through the Lilac Galaxy to go defeat Andros at the very end on the planet Venom. And it was I really loved it. I really wish there was a movie of this of Star Fox. I really do. And now that we have the Super Mario Brothers movie doing really well, who knows? Maybe a Star Fox movie might not be too far ahead.
Yeah, and the closest thing that we have right now for anything Star Fox animated related is a Fox in Space.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was really hooked on Star Fox. I immediately got Lilac Wars the minute I got my Nintendo 64. That's how much I love Star Fox.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Lilac Wars is what Star Fox 64.
Yeah, so it's I try to use so you say this is Star Fox 64, but this is the time. This is what we knew them as because you couldn't use the word Star Fox because it was trademarked by somebody else. It wasn't until we actually got Star Fox Adventures and Star Fox Assault and they started putting titles in the name, like Star Fox Command, for example, that we could actually call it Star Fox here in the UK.
Why was that? Was it because of the vacuum cleaner company?
Wait, it was because Star Fox was trademarked at the time.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying that did the trademark kind of slip away when those games came out?
Well, no, because it wasn't actually called Star Fox. It wasn't called you couldn't call it you couldn't put a number on the title. You could call it Star Fox Adventures or Star Fox Assault or Star Fox Command or Star Fox, Electric Boogaloo or something like that. You can call it that, but you just couldn't call it Star Fox at the time.
Gotcha. Yeah, so are there any other favorite SNES games that you have that is not in your collection?
Pile of Wings was hilarious, I thought, because there was this one bit where you actually have to land like a biplane, and I said, "Oh, I could give it." I remember my friend Mark. Shout out to Mark, by the way. He owned a Super Nintendo as well, and so I said, "You know what? I can have a go trying to land this plane." And he's like, "Okay, you'll be sorry." And so we fired it up, and there we are I'm there trying to line it up with all the circles that are in there, and it just couldn't do it. And even though I was coming towards the run, I was like, "Oh, hey, this is gonna be all right. This isn't gonna be too bad." And I crashed, and we all just started laughing. And it was like, "Oh my god, this is so difficult."
Right.
Yeah. So Pile of Wings, I think, added some very difficult, but also some hilarious experience as well. There's also the Mortal Kombat trilogy as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so there was that. Mortal Kombat 3 was quite a fun, Mortal Kombat game. Obviously, here's the thing about this. These ports, obviously don't live up to, the actual arcade as well. I actually, we have, an arcade, a machine, where I work, and, I now can play, the arcade version, all these beat-em-ups that I had owned on, on SNES, and I gotta say, the arcade, just blows away the console ports. Of
Yeah,
these
I just
games.
can't believe how far we've come with like how games are being developed, because nowadays anything that is out on an arcade is going to be just as good if you buy it on a console because of all the processing power that we have today.
Yeah, exactly. And so I mean, unless you own Neo Geo, you couldn't really get as close to an arcade version of the game really. And so unless you had the arcade system itself, you weren't really gonna get that close. Unlike today, where you can always get it on the virtual console, just download it effectively.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, but I mean, another game that I remember fondly, actually is now okay. There was a Street Racer as well.
Okay.
So there was a company that saw all the Street Fighter games that were coming out, and we thought, okay, let's do Street Racer. So they mixed Super Mario Kart with Street Fighter and came up with Street Racer. And funny enough, you think it was one of the throwaway Super Nintendo titles? No, it actually was pretty fun. I hope I come across it again. I played it at a friend's house and I thought it was quite fun. And also, they did a PlayStation version of it as well. And I might be wrong about this, but I think they are thinking of doing another version of it as well somewhere in the future.
That'd be really cool.
That would be really cool, yeah. So, so Street Racer was another one. All the Street Fighter games, I mean, all the beat 'em up games actually were fun on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, you have a Final Fight, and you had Battletoads and Double Dragon and all those games.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. So
yeah.
there was all that as well. So, I mean, all of that was pretty fun. Also, Castlevania 4, which I think is, some people say is the one of the best Castlevania games, at least in that bit era anyway. Always before Symphony of the Night came along, and obviously, then that became Castlevania, basically, forever, Castlevania forever and a day. But I think Castlevania 4 was actually was my first Castlevania game.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah, so challenging game of that, it threw you into the deep end pretty much trying to do that. They knew that I think that Castlevania fans were going to be really into Castlevania 4 and didn't really leave that much space for newer players, I got to admit. So but again, I found it fun, so that was really cool. And also there was another 3D racer that I can remember that also used the Super FX chip. That was kind of funny, and I can't remember what the Stun Race FX I think it was called.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was a fun game as well. So yeah, the Super Nintendo has a lot of fun memories, and I've only just got a small sample of that. And also, actually, I actually just remember now, I actually own now a refurbished version of Zelda: Link to the Past.
Oh, wow.
So by the way, shout out, there actually is a company out there. They're based out in Vietnam, and what they do is basically they take old Super Nintendo cartridges, they clean them all up, refurbish them, even relabel them if need be, and they even put them back in reproduced boxes as well. So it actually looks when you get it, it actually looks like a a fresh new Super Nintendo game. That's kind of takes you back to when you first bought it in the in the 90s. Obviously, it doesn't come with the instruction manual. They're not going that elaborate with it or anything like that, or put it in the shrink wrap or anything like that. But it's still kind of cool to get that type of game and then have a look at it, open it up and oh wow, it smells like a fresh Super Nintendo game. That was a pretty cool experience for me to have. And so I actually owned a refurbished version of Zelda: Link to the Past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of my favorite games on the Super Nintendo, as I mentioned earlier, the Mega Man X games are some of my favorites. There was Mega Man X1, 2, and 3. The first one is my favorite because they were able to have such great level design. I really love the music. It's fantastic. And also they were able to have the Mavericks, which was, basically like the Robot Masters, but they made them into animals. And also it was the first introduction of both Zero and Sigma. And those were fantastic additions to Mega Man, when at the time it was starting to grow a little bit stale. It's okay, yeah, we have these 6 Mega Man games and we have them on the Game Boy. And yeah, I mean, the formula was already starting to get a little tired. But then the Mega Man X games were able to bring them into a new life that we hadn't seen before. Another one that was actually some of my favorites, it was actually some of the licensed games from Disney. I really loved playing Aladdin. Now, I know that there's a debate between Aladdin for the Sega Genesis versus Aladdin for the Super Nintendo, but I actually prefer Aladdin for the Super Nintendo because of a lot of the platforming, the music. It was able to match the scenes from the movie. I mean, with the exception of 1 or 2, but that's to be expected. But yeah, they were able to play the music off very well from the movie. And yeah, even though it's a very short and easy game, you can beat it in less than an hour. It was a lot of fun.
I mean, I've heard Mickey Mania is the Super Nintendo version is better than the Mega Drive version, I've heard.
I really like Mickey Mania. I like the Magical Quest games, and yeah, those are really great games, and I also enjoyed those as well. Lion King is really, really hard, by the way. Like, I can never get past the second level
I'm
when I
pretty
was
sure
a kid.
I told the story about how like I went to my dad's friend's house and she had like an American Genesis, and I managed to somehow like beat the Lion King like the level with like the pink rhino that you can't see
Yes.
in the background and something. She was amazed at how I was able to pull that off, and so she actually, because of that, I actually ended up with a game. So it's for the Mega Drive and not for the Super Nintendo, but still.
Yeah, they're both pretty much the same way. Even I had the Game Boy version, but it's mostly the same thing. And I remember that the reason why that second level was hard in the first place was because the developers noticed that when kids used to buy games and they would beat it in like less than a few days, they would like return it to the game stores or they would try to sell it for cheap. And so they decided to make the second level hard on purpose. And the guy even had to publicly apologize for making that level as hard as it was.
Well, screw you. I got past it.
Yeah. So Super Punch-Out was also another one of my favorites. I think that it's not on par with the NES or even the Wii version, but I liked it okay. I finally was able to beat up, Nick and Rick Bruiser, which I was having so much difficulties with playing because they hit really, really hard and really, really fast. But I was able to defeat them pretty easily. And I also really enjoyed the Contra games. Like, I really enjoyed the Contra on the NES, and I really liked Contra 3. Even though Contra 3 is really hard, like, I cannot beat the fourth level because it is so difficult. Like, all the obstacles that you have to avoid, and also you even though that you do get like an extra lives code, is nothing like the 30 level Konami code, which is really, really frustrating. And yeah, there are a lot of other games. I know that RPGs were massive in the Super Nintendo, but unfortunately I am not a JRPG fan. Like, I tried to get myself acquainted with like Final Fantasy VI, and I was even playing through a little bit of Earthbound, but only Super Mario RPG really caught my attention because I just love Mario, and I also really like the music, and I also really like the fact that it was an easier game to actually grasp and get a hold of. But yeah, I mean, Earthbound did kind of grip my attention for a little bit, but then I started losing interest for a while. But as for Super Mario RPG, I'm almost finished with it.
By the way, there's one thing I want to mention about Star Fox in regards to Super Nintendo. There was supposed to be a sequel called Star Fox 2, and anyone who has listened to like one of my podcasts recently knows the story about Star Fox. But I will say if it's for old school Lane fans who don't know about it. So originally this was going to be like, it was all completed, it was ready to go, and then they decided to scrap it and decided to, like, because Lilac Wars was going to be coming out on Star Fox, Star Fox 64 was going to come out on the Super Nintendo 64 instead. Somehow that completed version of the game ended up being leaked online. So so it's been like reworked in so many ways. But then eventually the SNES Classic basically came out, and they actually released a proper build of Star Fox 2 on that. But here's the thing about this, Star Fox 2 never had an official release on the original Super Nintendo. The only official release that's really happened of Star Fox 2 has been on the SNES Classic.
That's crazy to think about. And to think that we, gotten this game like many years prior because it was leaked online. And, some of the stuff that was implemented in Star Fox 2 would be later showcased in like Star Fox 64, and with even Star Fox Zero that would come out like many years later on the Wii U.
A lot of people ask me, like, are you going to pick up an SNES Classic game to play Star Fox 2? It's like, well, I've already played it online, so like, so I don't really see a reason to, pick up an SNES Classic for like, a ton amount of money just to, play again. Don't get me wrong, like, if I find an SNES Classic and, I have a chance to play Star Fox 2, I think I will get a chance to play it, but, someone already released like, an English translated version, actually, and basically an English build of Star Fox 2, so I just played that and completed it, and, I'm satisfied as far as I'm concerned.
Right. And yeah, there are a lot of other games for the Super Nintendo that are some of my favorites. I really like the Final Fight games. A lot of things from Capcom was really, really great. I really enjoyed, as mentioned before, like, a lot of the Street Fighter games, and also with Mega Man. And I also really enjoyed, like you were saying before, Super Castlevania 4 is one of my favorites as well. And yeah, I really just have a lot of fond memories with the Super Nintendo. It's like in the top 3 of my favorite consoles of all time because of all the amazing games that it was able to release over there and was able to like break new ground compared to what the NES was able to showcase. So, yeah, I think that the Super Nintendo and the NES were able to do some fantastic things into the gaming system, where the NES was able to kind of like save the video game crash of 83 when people didn't care about video games anymore. And then the Super Nintendo was able to like craft some of the best games that have ever been released ever and was able to become the stepping stones for a lot of the games that we have today. So I say that for both of these consoles, they're easily accessible for a virtual console on the Nintendo Switch, or you can buy the NES Classic or the SNES Classic. And I would recommend that you check out all of this stuff just so you can see how the world of gaming progressed. Yeah, so that is it for this episode of Casual Chats, where we talked about NES and SNES memories. So, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on by.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I think we really just kind of scratched the surface, I think, of, Super Nintendo memories. Hopefully we're going to do one more of these in the future, maybe when we have some more stuff. So
Absolutely. Yeah, we can definitely do a part 2 on this. So,
Cool.
yeah. Why don't you plug and promote your stuff?
You can find me on Twitter. It's Arun Mehta Show, ARUNMEHTASHOW. You want to ask me a question on Tumblr, it's arunmehta.tumblr.com. And if you want to find me on Instagram, it's also at Arun Mehta Show.
All right, and as for me, you can check out my work on oldschoollane.net. I have a YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/oldschoollane, facebook.com/oldschoollane. I'm on Twitter at Patty_B_Miranda. You can check out my podcasts on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, all those places. New episodes of the podcast will go there first, and then they'll be going up in a few days on YouTube. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. Let us know in the comments below about your NES and SNES memories. What were your favorite games? Did you have any fond memories playing with it with your family members or with your friends? Which console do you prefer and why? And let us know if you want us to have a part 2 where we go over more memories. So that's it. Hope to see you around soon and take care.
Bye-bye.